Distinguished delegates, civil society representatives, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased to welcome you to the side event on loss and damage here in Africa, which is one of the areas of the world most impacted by climate change and the least responsible. It is also where the needs in terms of loss and damage are already significant. To begin this event, I am honored to give the floor to Mr. Philippe Henry, who is the Minister for Climate, Energy, Mobility, Infrastructures, and Vice President of the Government of Wallonia. Minister Henry is going to speak about how was built the strategy of the Government of Wallonia to address loss and damage to channel funding. Please, Minister Henry, you have the floor.
Dear participants, I am especially delighted to open this side event, as addressing loss and damage is, to my mind, of huge importance, as it is clear that climate change exacerbates inequalities, as it primarily affects the world's poorest and more vulnerable people who are most adversely affected. And there is also no doubt that limits to adaptation have unfortunately already been exceeded in a wide variety of situations, and that a series of harmful effects of climate change are already visible and too often irreversible. The question of irreparable damage caused to the population in developing countries by climate change can no longer be ignored and can no longer be brought in as a matter of secondary importance. That's why I am committed to act on the issue of loss and damage. I am determined to work hard to make continuous improvements at achieving ambitious objectives and results during this COP27 and the forthcoming meetings of the COP. Whilst a real gap already exists between developed and developing countries on how the loss and damage issues should be taken into consideration at these negotiations, the promising first steps towards reconciliations between these differing views have already been taken. These steps are small but headed in the right direction. This was possible due in part to Scotland and Wallonia, each of which announced in Glasgow at the COP26 their intent to contribute to the financing of loss and damage, without waiting for obtaining an international decision on a potential future finance facility. More specifically, at the end of the previous COP, I announced a contribution of Wallonia up to €1 million, which would be reserved in 2022 for specific measures linked with loss and damage. And I would like to thank Professor Vanni Purcell, which is here today, who was a good advisor about this and encouraged me to act so. I also would like to emphasize a new initiative of the Belgian federal government, €2.5 million to strengthen Mozambique's National Disasters Management Institute. The search and the selection of funding methods aimed to implementing this commitment was not a smooth ride. Our objective was to select initiatives that ensure the rapid and adequate channeling of funding to the local communities who already suffer from the adverse effects of climate change. But it must be noted that much work remains to be done to ease the adequacy with regards to loss and damage between international funding available and the needs. We identified the CVF and V20 Joint Multi-Donor Fund, which aims to reduce threats and enhance protection of countries and communities most vulnerable to climate change. One of the numerous activities supported by the fund is the V20 Loss and Damage Funding Program, which is a program dedicated to loss and damage caused by climate change. This new funding program of the fund, of course, captured my full attention because it aims at the rapid disbursement of small-scale grants directly into affected communities of the CVF V20's 58 member states. At my request, the Walloon region therefore asked for strengthening this program by making a contribution of 1 million euros to the CVF and V20 Joint Multi-Donor Fund, which will be exclusively affected towards the V20 Loss and Damage Funding Program. And this for the following 5 main reasons. In view of the precursory nature of this V20 Loss and Damage Funding Program, and by its purely exemplary quality, the fact that the funds will be channeled quickly and directly to the local communities affected by the impacts of climate change. The reliability of the fund, including the financial management administered by the United Nations Office for Project Service, the quality of the experts of the CVF Expert Advisory Group. Moreover, the CVF has decided to make a loss and damage its key communications issues in 2022 by launching an online social campaign entitled Payment Overdue. The campaign is asking for the biggest polluting nations to finally pay up for loss and damage. It aims to raise awareness of loss and damage, build support and attract funds to address loss and damage, and it aims to promote sharing of loss and damage solutions. I fully support this CVF and V20 campaign, and I encourage the public and organizations to also get behind it. In the future, Wallonia will continue to bring the loss and damage issue out of the shadows. We will also engage some new and additional financial means to assist properly and efficiently the most vulnerable areas already impacted by climate change. I have the honor to announce that Wallonia will contribute 2 million euros in 2023 to continue its pioneering work. The use of this new financial commitment will be operationalized in close collaboration with all stakeholders. Thank you for your attention.
I thank you, Minister Henry, for your intervention. Now, in order to complete the existing framework on the Walloon commitment, we are happy to welcome Nilesh Prakash, who will speak about the CVF and V20 joint multi-donor funding, and more particularly, the CVF and V20 loss and damage funding program, exclusively earmarked to the loss and damage issue, and whose Wallonia is now one of the first contributors. Nilesh Prakash is SEED's advisor with the V20 Secretariat. Nilesh, you have the floor.
Minister, thank you very much for your remarks and for the commitment that you and the government of Wallonia are showing to this issue of loss and damage, and I think I couldn't agree with you more that we cannot wait for the multilateral processes to act on important issues like financing for loss and damage. So we really salute your leadership on this, and we certainly look forward to working with the government of Wallonia on this. As Olivia mentioned, my name is Nilesh and I'm from the V20 Secretariat. Just so you know, the CVF and the V20, and I think there are some present in the room who know this forum more than me, but the CVF is really a convening of the heads of states at the political level championing climate change issues, while the V20 group is a group of finance ministers. So you can see this is a beautiful marriage between what's happening at the political level, but then the climate conversation cannot be divorced from climate finance and really all the financial cooperation that needs to happen to address the climate crisis. So I represent the V20 Secretariat, and I literally walked out of the launch of the Global Shield against climate risks. So this is a G7 and V20 initiative really to scale up financial protection for developing countries, 58 countries of the CVF and V20, but really we are looking at the cohort of all developing countries. So just to give you a bit of background in terms of what the Global Shield is and where the contribution from the government of Wallonia, how it's making a dent in this sort of overall space, I've got a set of slides which I will take you through. So can I have the first slide, please? Okay, so we've really jumped onto the agreement that the G7 and V20 reached, and this is exactly a month ago in Washington D.C. when the G7 presidency represented by Germany and the V20 we reached a collective agreement on the global shield against climate risks. The next slide, please. So exactly a month after, which is today, this global shield has been launched, and we had a number of high-level speakers. We had the German minister who was exchanging that placard with the special envoy from Ghana. We also had John Kerry speak at the event, and of course committing the funds that US is committing towards the global shield. The next slide, please. So this is quite a lot to digest, but I just wanted to present how the communication and the conversation rather has evolved. Thank you. Has evolved on the global shield since perhaps 2022, the senior officials meeting, the ministerial meetings, the meetings of the G7 summit, including the G7 development ministers communique. So this is where the conversation of the global shield has been, and in the background, of course, the Secretariat for the Ensure Resilience Global Partnership, as well as the Secretariat for the V20, we've been working hard to really shape the global shield. And as you can see, it is really aiming to build that momentum to increase, pre-arranged finance, significantly, and really scaling up that finance, based on country ownership, really to provide, financial protection to climate vulnerable countries. So in terms of the vision of the global risk, global shield rather, so really, to increase that cooperation, to substantially increase financial protection against, climate risks, and we need more systemic and coherent and sustained approach, in doing this, knowing that there are a number of actors, who have got their own initiatives. We need to be able to eliminate, linear approaches and really consolidate all efforts. And in doing so, we need more and better pre-arranged and trigger-based finance for climate vulnerable countries, which is really accessible to the countries, and it is deployed in the most effective manner to people that need it, and which is really the vulnerable communities, enterprises, and people. This slide, I apologize, is not too very clear, but really I think the focus here is on the financing structure. So there is, the financing from the World Bank Global Shield Financing Facility, which is the first bar, and then we have the CVF and the V20 Joint Multi-Donor Trust Fund, which is where the contribution of 1 million euros from the government of Wallonia has gone into, which is the trust fund. And then of course we have the Global Shield Solutions platform, which is the rest of the financing for the Global Shield. So in terms of what the CVF and the V20 Joint Multi-Donor Fund is going to, so there are a number of I would say programs under the Global Shield which the Joint Multi-Donor Trust Fund is going to fund. The first and foremost, as Minister you mentioned, is the V20 Loss and Damage Funding Program, and then of course we have other tracks of work which looks at premium subsidies. We're looking at off-balance sheet guarantees to reduce the cost of capital, and then we have a specific mechanism for that. And then looking at distribution channels and how do we enhance the distribution channels, and really looking at how can we create financial products for slow onset events. For example, sea level rise can really risk it, cost that risk and take it out to the market. So the focus really here on that funding commitment from Wallonia is on the loss and damage funding program. And in the next slide, which is of course my last slide, so this is the real focus of the V20 loss and damage program. And the three principal items that or investment typologies, if you like, that we are focusing on is, first is the community infrastructure, and that really looks at repairing and building of community buildings, water supplies, medical facilities, and public housing, for example. That's under community infrastructure, and we hope, by working with organizations such as Care International, who are very much connected with communities on the ground, we will be able to directly work with communities and people who are affected. And the second area of spend, if you like, is really on private assets, so which is really looking at housing repairs, temporary housing costs. We're looking at livelihood assets, for example, when livestock they die from climate-induced events, and of course, really looking at resources for livelihood sustenance, for example, tools, for example, for implementation really at the community level. The third component is an important one, because as we support the rebuild efforts of communities through the loss and damage funding program, we need to ensure that the funding that gets deployed in communities does have an adaptation component. So obviously this is something much bigger, and we will of course need much bigger pot of money to be able to do that, but primarily for for the loss and damage funding program, and really for the contribution that the government of Wallonia has made, the primary focus would be on community infrastructure and private assets. So this is really one aspect of that bigger proposal, under the V20 loss and damage funding program that we are developing. We also want to look at, for example, how we can tap into the multilateral processes for an efficient deployment of these funds. So I'll probably stop there and happy to take questions. And I've got a colleague of mine who has also joined us from UNOPS, who is actually administering the Joint Multi-Donor Fund. So if you have any questions, we'll be happy to take them. Thank you very much.
I thank you for your intervention, Mr. Prakesh. And now it is a pleasure to welcome Professor Salamul Hook from the ACCAD, who will focus on priorities in link with the urgency of the founding. Please, Professor, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Good afternoon, everybody. Honorable Minister, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great privilege and pleasure for me to be here today. My name is Salimul Haq. I'm the Director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development at the Independent University, Bangladesh. I'm also chair of the Expert Advisory Group of the Climate Vulnerable Forum that you just saw here, and have been advising them on the creation of the loss and damage window in the multi-donor fund that they had created some years ago, but the loss and damage window is new. I'm also, in this context, in the Conference of Parties, one of my credentials is that I'm one of the few people who's been to all 27 Conference of Parties, so this is my 27th COP. And I must say, it's a very different COP for a very important reason. It may be the 27th Conference of Parties of the Framework Convention, but it happens also to be the first COP of a new era of impacts of human-induced climate change now happening. Not in the future, happening already. And next year they're going to get worse, and then the year after that they're going to get worse, and in the near future they're going to get worse every single year. In the long term, we hope we can stop them getting even worse, but the worst part for the next part of this decade is locked in, and we will suffer losses and damages from climate change, and the UNFCCC has to take some responsibility. So the good news is we have an agenda item. We had a fight on the agenda. We got an agreement to have finance for loss and damage on the agenda here in the UNFCCC, and hopefully by the end of the week we will have a result out of that. But at the same time, the urgency cannot wait for the UNFCCC process. It will take this COP and then next COP and then another COP before any money might flow under the UNFCCC. So last year in Glasgow, when we also made the same demand, the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, stepped up and put £2 million on the table as brand new funding for loss and damage specifically, and she urged other leaders to follow her example, and I'm very, very pleased that the government of Wallonia in Belgium stepped up and offered €1 million, and so the ball has started to roll. And recently Scotland held a meeting in Scotland about a month ago in Edinburgh, bringing together what we call the Action Coalition on loss and damage. We are not waiting, we are not talking, we are doing things. And Wallonia is very much part of that, and we hope that you'll continue. I've asked the First Minister, and incidentally she was here last week, and she did a side event here where I was speaking with her, and she announced another £5 million from Scotland for loss and damage, in addition to the $2 million she gave last year. So the ball has started to roll, and we are now getting a good coalition of actors, funders, action people, people working on the ground, and then we now have the V20 CVF fund as well as a mechanism which Wallonia has contributed to. So I feel a lot of positive momentum in what I call the real world of tackling the impacts of climate change, as opposed to the talking world. The COP is a talking world. We're going to talk for the next 2 weeks, and then I'm predicting we'll talk all night on Friday. We won't finish on Friday. We'll go on talking, and then we'll decide a little thing, and then we'll come back a year later and we'll keep on talking. That's what happens in the COPs. We don't want to give up on it. We want to push it, but it's not going to deliver anything in the short term. So we need to be active, those who are willing to be active, to have this coalition of the willing, and I'm very glad that Scotland and Wallonia both are here represented, and I feel very proud to be associated with both of them. Thank you very much, Olivier.
Thank you, Professor, for this very inspirational message. Now, I am glad to introduce Emma Fenton from the Scottish Government, who is going to expose the Scottish Action Plan to address loss and damage. Emma is Head of International Climate Policy and in the Climate Change Division within the Directorate for Energy and Climate Change from the Scottish Government. Emma, you have the floor.
Thanks, Olivier, and thank you to the Wallonian Government for the opportunity to come and address this room. I am going to talk a little bit about what Scotland does, a preview of something I'll be talking about later in the speech. A bit better? Great. I'm going to take you through the funding pledges that we've made, what we're doing with it, what they're pledged to, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about the conference that Salim spoke of in his speech. I'm going to step backwards. Is that better? There we go. Thank you. So as Salim mentioned, last year at COP26, we pledged £2 million from the Scottish Government. I'm going to try this again. Okay. £2 million from the Scottish Government, and that has already been spent. It's already being spent in communities impacted by loss and damage. So £1 million of that, that's aggressively close, but I'll take it. £1 million of that was pledged in partnership with the Climate Justice Resilience Fund. It's already making a difference in communities in Bangladesh, in the Pacific, and in Malawi. And we're also launching a participatory grant-making scheme with a youth board. For the first time, young people making a decision about where money should go. Do you ever feel like sometimes outside events are just telling you to be quiet and hurry up? So this year we pledged 5 million, and that 5 million will be going exclusively on slow onset and non-economic loss and damage. It's underrepresented, underreported, and underfunded in this space. And as Salim said, we held a conference last month, and we're using that to help us to decide how, where, and what we should be funding with our money. And the conference came up with 10 insights, which are here on screen now. And I just wanted to talk about a couple of them, because they are really important to the Scottish Government. The first one is urgency of action. As you heard from Salim, we are in the era of loss and damage. The limits to adaptation, as the Minister rightly said earlier, have been met or exceeded, and we can no longer adapt to a changing climate. Finance to address loss and damage is absolutely paramount to agree at this COP and outside of COP. So urgency of action, we have to act now. And as the First Minister said last week, it's a choice. You choose to act. You don't have to wait for a decision through the UNFCCC to make a decision, to make that commitment. And we're heartened by the bravery of governments like Wallonia to have made that decision with us. The second one I'd like to talk about is accessible to all. There's a huge amount of climate finance washing around that is simply not accessible to the communities and vulnerable individuals who need it the most. The architecture of it, the bureaucracy of it, is completely incomprehensible on the ground, and it can't get to where it needs to go. So funding to address loss and damage absolutely must do that. And the final one that I'd like to just highlight is no additional indebtedness. And what we mean by that is that the money that is spent on addressing loss and damage should be spent in the form of grants, not loans. I heard Avinash Prasad speak about this, and he said insurance schemes don't address loss and damage. It's still the victim pays, they just pay in installments, and I thought that was a really powerful message on insurance. So those are the insights that we will be using to inform how we spend our next new £5 million to address loss and damage. I also want to talk a bit about our approach more broadly. So we have 3 programs of work in the Scottish Government. One is around knowledge and evidence, which we are contributing to research from ICAD, from Professor Huck, on how to incorporate loss and damage into globally recognized strategies like national adaptation plans. And a second piece of research with the SEI in Stockholm on how to incorporate climate justice principles into funding to address loss and damage. The second stream of work that we have is around our policy and influence work, and that we're doing with partners like Wallonia, pushing the conversation, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with funding.
Just to tell you, actually the panelists, there's a food outside.
There's food outside. It's rare at this COP, so it's worth bearing that in mind. So our policy and influence work is working with other governments, with other multilateral institutions, to talk about the language that can often be a barrier at COPs. We know full well that there are plenty of delegations who are calling for a finance facility at this COP. That is an outcome that they are determined to achieve, but as the First Minister said last week, the question of a finance facility is a question of commitment to formal financial architecture, not necessarily a specific facility. And what we need to do is make sure that we take practical steps to get that agreement and not be held back by some of the rhetoric that people are holding so dear. And the final work stream that we have is our impact programming, and that's what we're doing with the 2 million. That's what we will be doing with the 5 million, going directly onto the ground to support and serve the communities who most need it. And we do all of that impact programming in a participatory way, so it's co-designed with the people for whom we are trying to achieve the impact. I'll leave it there. I could rattle on about our methodology, but there might be another announcement about food, which is frankly more important. So I'll leave it there for now, but happy to take any questions. Thanks, Olivier.
Thank you for your presentation, intervention, Emma. Let's move to Emmanuel Sek. Emmanuel Sek is regional representative West and Central Africa with ENDA Energy. Emmanuel is going to explain the methodology developed by ENDA to assess the community needs. So, Mr. Sek, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Olivier, for having invited me in this high-level session, I will say. Really, Salim has said that the issue of loss and damage is urgency issues. But for me, I think that it's depend on, for some communities, it is a survival issues. And when we are discussing here in terms of finance, in terms of mechanism, we should consider how the climate change is really impacting the most vulnerable. And I would like, if you give me the opportunities, to thank and congratulate the Wallonia for committing in supporting these communities. And amongst these communities, I will say the Senegalese communities, particularly the fishing communities, how it's happened in our countries. When we start talking about the Warsaw International Mechanism, because I'm part also of the group of experts to advise and support the WIM at the international level, we've said that we've committed information or knowledge, because if you look at the Warsaw mechanism, the three main objectives are: the first one, to enhance the information and the knowledge. The second one is to look at where we could have the synergies amongst the different frameworks, like the UNFCCC, the Sendai framework, because it is one of them which is taking into account the issues of loss of disaster. And we have the last one, which is looking for capacity building. And we say we'll do our contribution by enhancing the information. And this is where we have developed studies on the slow onset event, because we are saying always that all loss and damage are not related to climate change. And when we look at the most prominent loss and damage or slow onset in Senegal, we see the sea level rise, which is a major one, the rise of temperature, the salinization of land, the desertification, the droughts. And Senegal is a Sahelian countries among the least developed countries, which is really affected by droughts. We have a frequency of droughts, which are undermining our agricultural productivities. We have also we face with the coastal erosion. If you look at all our coasts from the north to the south, many communities are really affected. We have seen that many of the houses were destroyed, and recently in 2017 and 2018, we have seen that the storms have destroyed in the communities more than 200 families. And if you look at the families, it is more than 2,000 people. And many of them were displaced. And we say after doing the studies related to the slow onset rate, we have the large frames to meet also the challenge related to the assessment of loss and damage. We say that we will deep dive by going to the communities and to see how we could assess the cost of the climate loss and damage within the communities and how we proceed. We identify the key communities, I mean the coastal communities, because for us the major trends is the coastal erosion. We identify in the large coast, because Senegal have two coasts. We have the large coast and we have the small coast. Within the large coast, if you look at in the Saint Louis, is where the communities are really affected. And many of them were displaced. And the question we've asked ourselves is that if, when they was taking the solution, did they interact or they consult the communities? That was not the case because it was an emergency. But we say that we need to change the process and co-construct with the communities. And in constructing with the communities is at least to have a continual, regular consultation with them, meetings with them to identify in the most vulnerable families, those who are the most affected, and what is the cost, how they can assess with us the cost of their loss in terms of coastal erosion. We do it in the household level, I mean individually, and also at the communities level by looking at the key sectors of their social or economics and where they investigate. And we say that in terms of fishing, there is something to do. In terms of processing, there is also activities to do. And then we will continue doing this assessment to see how we could help the government in providing solution to the communities. But the main things is the non-economical losses, because we have some sites, cultural sites, that was destroyed, and you know that these have often impact in the communities. And we say that these things also need to be considered within the process. So we continue doing the work to inform not only at the country level and to find some solution, because solution was there, to look at the local mechanism, adequate local mechanism to reach really the communities. Because if you look at the funds that we receive, you take, for example, 100%, only 10% go reach the communities. So, and there we say that we will not have impact. To have impacts, we need at least to set up some mechanism that are really reaching the communities, and also contribute to find solution in repairing the loss that are affecting the communities. So we are in continuing this exercise. We have some partners who are working with us, particularly SEI, Stockholm Environment Institute. We have ODI and other partners who are working with us to give solutions, but also to provide information on the cost of loss and damage within the communities. And I think that Senegal may be considered as a pilot, but also a champion in terms of assessing the cost of loss and damage within the communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sek, for your intervention. And last but not least, some remarks, recommendations from the civil society to elaborate strategies to address loss and damage. We welcome Rebecca Thyssen, in charge of climate justice with CNCD 111111. Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me all right. Yes, nice. So I'm very happy to be here today to give some insight from a civil society perspective At CNCD 11-11-11, we have been very engaged with Wallonia towards the loss and damage pledge, toward the loss and damage reflection that they had last year. So I'm happy to give some comment about that, but you know that my role is also to be a bit critical, so I will give an extended understanding of what we think at CNCD. So first, we welcome and we thank Wallonia for its action, the same as Scotland did and other actors at this COP. And you may have seen that there were more and more pledges for loss and damage money towards COP27. So regarding the Walloon pledge, we really think that it's a positive action regarding the quality of the money. This money is additional, which is totally not the case for most of the other pledge that has been made. I will come back to that. It's focusing on the most vulnerable. It's focusing on addressing money rapidly. And we know, Salim told us that money discussions are very slow, especially when it's about money, and we talk more. So it's very important also to send a signal, a strong signal that we can answer and help the most impacted. So I think this will really help to construct constructive dynamic to help the debate flowing forward, and that we can really at some point address loss and damage with the scaling money that we need to see. I also think that those kind of projects, those kind of action, those kind of pledge are helping in the way that we can learn by doing. With those really small scale projects regarding the scale of money that we need, we can understand better what actually loss and damage money could be. What is a project to address loss and damage? Where do we need to act first? How do we answer to that or that event? And regarding this million, I think that's also something that we should really look forward, understand better and more concretely what is addressing loss and damage today. Having said that, I would also be a bit careful about those pledges, because if we are all tired of the talk shop, we need action, we understand that and we agree on that, but we need action that is fit for purpose. As I said, the majority of the pledge made since the beginning of this COP are not additional. So it's taking money that should go maybe to adaptation or to mitigation to loss and damage. While we still need money for the three, right? We need to ensure that mitigation objectives are met, we need to support adaptation projects, and we need to address loss and damage. So that's the first thing that we should really be careful of when we examine all those pledges. Secondly, we talked about the global shield, and we see that more and more commitments are going toward that direction. So we, of course, agree that it has to be part of the solution. Any actors and any contribution are welcome regarding loss and damage, and we welcome the leadership of the V20 in that regard. But we also should be careful about the different funding windows under this global shield. If we are very confident in one of them regarding the fact that the V20 is actually dealing with this fund and have loss and damage inside for the most vulnerable, we don't know really what will happen with the two other funding windows that we saw on the slide showed earlier. And we are not so sure about insurance being so fit for purpose for the most vulnerable, for non-economic loss and damage, for small-scale loss and damage. So there are still many questions that raise, but we see already a lot of money flowing in that direction. So I will please remind everybody in this room that if we need action and support regarding loss and damage, we also need to have international decision, to have a finance mechanism set at this COP. This is what we need to ensure that on the long term we will give the money that scales at the scales needed for loss and damage. That's my last point. So regarding what we want regarding loss and damage at this COP, it's more than just an agenda item, right? We won that fight at the beginning of this COP. We were very happy to be able to discuss finally, after 30 years of negotiation, loss and damage finance. We have now an agenda item specifically for that, but it's more just that technicalities and political debate. It's a matter of trust, it's a matter of responsibility, and it's a matter of justice. So while we need today at this COP a solution regarding loss and damage finance, especially for all those reasons above, and mostly for the people that are currently affected on the ground. So you may have heard in the discussion, if you are a bit following the negotiation, that more and more countries, developed countries mostly, are talking about a mosaic of solution, that we could have a lot of solutions working for loss and damage. We agree. We need everybody, as I say, contributing to the loss and damage debate, to loss and damage finance, but we need this facility to coordinate all of that and make sure that the money is achieving the most vulnerable on time. So that's why I really think we should go for a political commitment at this COP. As I say, it's a matter of climate justice, and so I will just close by saying what you maybe heard in the rooms and you will probably hear again: pay up for loss and damage. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, and a great thank to all our distinguished speakers this afternoon. I hope this event achieves its goals to provide a balanced and comprehensive overview in terms of recommendations and the practical implications to develop an efficient strategy to channel the funding rapidly and directly to communities, consistently with the urgency of the local needs. Well, since as we are in the perfect timing, let me propose to our distinguished speakers to sit on the floor for a few questions, if you are. So. Thank you. Is there any question? Please, can I give the floor to go further in the comprehension of the different points we spoke this afternoon? Madame, we are listening to you. Microphone, please, for Madame. Or do you want to... out there. Yeah, sure. Or we can...
Sorry, I didn't mean to take over. It's a question for the gentleman that was talking about the global shield. Obviously, kind of Rebecca's already mentioned there is huge scepticism in the kind of civil society movement about the global shield, and feel that it's a bit of a distraction when really what we want is a loss and damage finance facility. How do you counter that it is a distraction?
Thanks.
It works?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that question. So obviously we don't see the global shield as a distraction, but really as a vehicle, to crowd in additional new and additional, finance for financial protection. Although, because this is a V20 and G7 initiative, we do have, one of the tracks of work is loss and damage funding program, and I think I did, discuss the investment, typologies under the V20 loss and damage funding program. So I guess what I can say is, rest assured, there is, huge momentum on loss and damage. I mean, of course, there is a lot of conversation and, happening at the multilateral level here at this COP, and we do hope that there would be some agreement on that, financing vehicle that we all are looking forward to, at this level. But I guess, to really drive that, the push for that, and really to sort of, create a lot of inspiration for that UNFCCC level mechanism. This is something that we are doing at the V20 level, hopefully to inspire, that effort. So I guess, I don't know how you see that as a distraction, but I think, there are some, very distinct, sort of work programs, but ultimately all leading towards, financial, to that overall objective of increasing financial protection.
Thank you. Another question, madam? We listen to you. The microphone, whether you can hear or...
Thank you. It was pretty clear that we are facing two challenges regarding loss and damage: additional money and a specific mechanism. And we are trying, I belong to a parliament in my country, Belgium, and we are trying to have this discussion. And we often hear what is really the point to have a specific mechanism when you want to make sure that the money that you bring is community-based. Is it something that can go together? A global UN mechanism, so heavy, technical, and make sure that the money goes directly to the communities, which is the point that you've been making, that is the first emergency. So if you can clarify that, that would be helpful. And otherwise, thank you.
Yes, indeed, we need additional funds, and definitely we need a mechanism that may help to get resources in a predictable and urgent manner. We have given some example here. When a disaster comes, it cannot wait for 2 years or more than 1 year to find resources. And we have here some mechanisms that are very heavy to rely or to answer to the issue of loss and damage. If you look at, for example, the adaptation funds, if you develop a project, it may take more than 1 year to be approved. Same if it is not rose with the Green Climate Fund. So if a disaster appears in a communities, can we wait so long to respond to the problems of people? No. That is why we say we need definitely a mechanism that can urgently respond to the need of the communities. We can find many ways. For example, setting up some funds at the country level where we think that if there is a disaster happening at the international level and the resources available allocated to the countries, they can feed these national funds, which will rely or align with what is at the country level. I will give just the case of Senegal. We have what we say the Plan Orsec is a fund or a plan for urgency. So if, for example, the country mobilize a national budget and there is international support, I think this support could be could go through this kind of mechanism. But definitely we need something which is really different with what we have actually at the global level, I think.
Yeah, maybe just to complement, I totally agree. I think we can also learn a lot about what have been done regarding climate finance for the past decade. There are funds existing, they have lots of caveats, lots of gaps, so I think while building up this new facility, we should really base on what we know. And we know a lot of study has been made, many experts are in the room, so I think we should build up on that. And the second thing I wanted to add is we are talking a lot about the facility, but it's not only the facility that's negotiated at this COP. There is also the Santiago network, which is actually the technical arm regarding loss and damage. And if we make it operational in a way that can actually channel money much more efficiently, much faster, it could also be a very good complementary of the facility that we need to build. So I think solutions are there. We just need to make them coherent, efficient, and on time, obviously.
Thank you. Obviously, Scotland isn't a party to the UNFCCC, so we don't take a negotiating position. But I think what we've seen in the negotiations so far is appetite from across the negotiators to agree some sort of formal financial architecture. And I think that's really important. And I think whether it's a facility or a reworking of an existing fund or a different financial mechanism altogether, what's important is the agreement to formal funding. And to the question, I'd say the importance of a facility or or a formal financial architecture agreement is building trust and faith between the developing and developed countries that this issue will be taken seriously, the funding will be adequate, and it will be provided with the scale and urgency that's so desperately needed.
Perhaps just a compliment to say I think it's a very important subject as we see the loss and damage, and it's absolutely necessary to hear it from many countries from the south who want to address that question. And I think there is a necessity to have two different kind of response. It is action and it is projects, and that could be done. That is what has been done by Scotland, by Wallonia, and by other countries. Decisions now, money now, on a project that can be addressed at the short term. And then there is the bigger discussion inside the COP, inside the governments and the mechanism, and we know how it can be long, how it can be complicated. So that's why it's necessary to act also on bilateral and direct projects, and that's what we have decided to do, and I hope that other countries can do it also.
Another question? You can go to the floor, so take the microphone. And thank you for your question.
Sorry, so if someone needs the microphone, I will share. Maybe just a question to our politicians over there. How do you explain that the first step is made by very small countries? Wallonia is not a country, it's a region. So it's very powerful, but not so large, and Scotland. And so how do you explain that it comes from small areas that have this vision? And the second question linked is, what are the major, what are the biggest difficulties that you have experienced with your colleagues in your coalitions, and regarding the link you have with your national or federal entities? Was it obvious for everybody? Did they say, oh yes, that's a good idea, we will do the same? And if not, why not? And how can you make sure that your national or federal entities will follow your example?
Okay. So why is it that small nations, sub-state, regional actors have gone first? I think we have the blessing and the curse of not being a party government to the UNFCCC, so we don't have to wait for the negotiations because we have no say in them. So Scotland not being a party government means that the action we can take is almost exclusively outside of the negotiating rooms, and that means funding direct bilateral funding for projects that are making a difference right now, and we are lucky to be able to work in a way that is more nimble than those who are constrained by the discussions, or who feel constrained by the discussions happening at the UNFCCC. Do we agree with the UK government on this issue? I think we are increasingly seeing positive words from the UK government on loss and damage, particularly at the official level, and I hope that the representations they make during the negotiations will be increasingly positive. But Scotland has no influence over those. So we do engage with them, of course we do, but where they lack ambition, we will act.
I think it's very important that little countries or regions do act on the climate debate, and that's not always only the sum of money, how much money it's possible to put on the table. It's the symbol, it's the dynamic, it's the initiative that can be followed by other countries, and it's very, very important, especially in bilateral discussions. For example, for Wallonia, we have a tradition to discuss since many years with countries from the south, from French-speaking countries, other countries, and since 2010 we had already experienced fast start financements, which was already the same principle, additional project in cooperation, climate cooperation, and it's very important in the general dynamic. It's not only the big countries that can help in the dynamics, in the contribution, in the construction of a global agreement. So I think the little countries and the little regions are very important into that. And here, in a certain manner, it's a new generation of the same type of projects we made with the projects in 2010, fast finance, fast start projects, and now it's redirected in loss and damage, which is a more new debate, but which is now very, very important. Of course, there are several debates, I think, in all countries. It's normal. There are different opinions. There are different point of views, but the very important thing is that we contribute to the worldwide dynamics and to help the discussion about climate.
Yes, you have the microphone.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for giving me the floor. I'm from Senegal, negotiating on loss and damage. I was from...
We don't hear you.
Okay, no, it was not on, it was off. So I'm from Senegal and negotiating on loss and damage. Was a member of the executive committee of the WIM. What I noticed that is in the discussion and negotiation, when we created the WIM, I think the objective was to act in the emergency when extreme evil happens. And then we had the WIM, we was negotiating to make the WIM operational, and then suddenly we have the Santiago network coming. And first, now we try to make the Santiago network operational before going to the WIM operational. That is, for me, put in many more time for going to the WIM and try to make the operational. The short way was to try to put a financial mechanism just after the WIM and work to make this financial mechanism to help the WIM to be operational. And that is the problem for me. So when we had the Santiago network, we were supposed to work very tightly to have a financial mechanism for the WIM. And if you see the trend of the negotiation, we are going to have a very light and small fund to make operational the Santiago network, and put another fund will be come for making the WIM operational. Does it fair? Does it what those people who are now in sufferance with the adverse effect of loss and damage, is it what they need now? How can we act? Definitely. And in the negotiation, Mr. Minister, really congratulations for putting 1 million in this basket on the bilateral for loss and damage in vulnerable countries. But what we need is here in the table of the negotiation, how you can push that can allow us as a negotiator of what we are asking and demanding here to have an agreement. First, an agreement on a fund, finance facility for Santiago network, and to agree here on a financial mechanism, and then put an action plan where we can operationalize this financial mechanism. I think that is what it is more crucial, and what we need here, the until need for loss and damage. I thank you, sir.
I obviously don't have the answer to your question, but I'm working towards it. But maybe just something that's good for people to know if you're not really going into the negotiating rooms. It's interesting to see that we see exactly the same old tactics from some countries happening to delay action. A good example is we need to explore the gaps. We know the gaps. Studies have been done since 10 years, but the argument we have on the table right now is we need more time to explore the gaps. Or we need to have a workshop or a dialogue. If you look at the history of negotiations in just 10 years, you can go further if you want, it would be the same. We have been talking, discussing, dialoguing, having workshopping on loss and damage for a very, very long time. So it's important also to call that out, to say that you are actually using tactics to talk rather than to act, to talk rather than to pay. So I think it's also important that everybody, and not only negotiators, are aware of that, observe that, and call it out, because otherwise we won't have any good outcome at this COP, and then we can ask if we still want to discuss, right, at an international level, if we are not able to call for climate justice, to put concrete action for climate justice. But I think that's also important to understand that the dynamics are very strong on that topic, and that we should also denounce that and help to push forward to a fair outcome of this COP.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you for your participation and question, very relevant question. So I just wish you a very good COP, very good results, and really thanks for all. And maybe still an applause to our distinguished speaker this afternoon, who I think has contributed to give you more relevant information about how to address loss and damage. Thank you very much.